Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Majority Leader. Some of my questions were already raised, and so I would be doing my best to expedite the deliberation of the budget. And let me put into the records that this representation had been very supportive since time immemorial of the national budget. But there are some issues that we would like to again raise in this August chamber, as we have been consistently raising some of these issues, Mr. President. I will no longer touch on the national debt. I will start by asking one of the closest issue to this representation. Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, since 2017, we have been raising the issue of unfilled positions in government and the increasing number of job orders, contract of service workers in government. Bilang alam po natin na pinakamalaking employer sa bansa ay ang pamahalaan. Mr. President, may I just put into the records that according to the 2025 staffing summary, the total number of permanent positions for fiscal year 2025 is 2,017,380, of which 1,848,648, or 91.6% positions are filled, and 168,732 items, or 8.4% from the total number of positions available, are unfilled. And in contrast, Mr. President, the unfilled positions constitute 8.54% of the total number of permanent positions. So kung titignan niyo po, Mr. President, yung the past 5 years na kung saan ay yung mga unfilled positions ay napifill upan ng pamahalaan, itong nakaraang taon, 0.1% lang. In fact, we have been saying this for quite some time. 1 out of 10 positions in government are still unfilled. So may we know, Mr. President, kung meron man nagbago, baka pwedeng ma-update po ang representasyon na ito at makita naman ho natin, kasi kung 0.1% lang yung nangyari sa issue ng unfilled position, parang nabaliwala naman ho yata na since 2017 nire-raise natin ito. And I think the good chairperson of the Senate Committee on Finance would attest to this representation's advocacy in raising and pointing this out with the workers in government. Mr. President, thank you.
Yes, Mr. President, I know that our good colleague from the great province of Bulacan has always had this advocacy for workers and trying to eliminate the permanent job order status. I know that the requirements really, there has been executive orders that you cannot, there are certain criterias. You can hire for seasonal employment. For example, let's say when you're building roads, you need more workers. You can also hire for specific expertise for consultants. But in other concerns, in the general provisions of the guide stipulates that the heads of department and bureau offices and instrumentalities under executive branch shall adopt an institutional strengthening measures to enhance the productivity and improve service of delivery. So agencies are also encouraged to appoint the respective qualified COS and JO workers to the vacant positions of the agency. The hiring of contractual positions shall be subject to the CSC rules and regulations. Currently, the DBM is preparing a draft circular calling for the submission of roadmaps, action plans by the different departments, agencies with regards to their respective positions that have been unfilled in the past 5 years. To clarify, those positions that have been vacant for the past 5 years will not be automatically abolished. Instead, said circular to be issued will stipulate the procedural guidelines on how its implementation, which will include, among others, the review to be conducted by departments, agencies of their organizational structure and existing positions in order for them to determine the necessary modifications to be included in their respective roadmaps. So agencies that fail to submit the roadmap, action plan, and report prescribed deadline will be subject to a mandatory position audit. Anong deadline?
Yes, Mr. President, distinguished colleague, and I appreciate the
Yeah,
answers given to us by our chairperson of the Senate Committee on Finance. Mr. President, I'll go later on the issue of job orders and contract of service. In fact, in the committee hearings, we asked for the submission of these documents. In fact, we were able to get the documents submitted by DBM, documents coming from different agencies of the government. While I'm still on the issue of unfilled and filled positions, may I just ask perhaps one last time, Mr. President, how many unfilled positions are still available in the government sector, Mr. President? To date, probably the latest figures that we have, do we still have 168,000?
Yes,
So
168.
168,732 items, still the figures that we are looking at. Thank you, Mr. President, distinguished colleague. Mr. President, let me also find out the status requests of various agencies for reorganization and reclassification of positions. I'd like to raise this question because even during the time, Mr. President, that I was at the helm of Technical Education Skills Development Authority, we have had several instances that a government employee has been contract of service or job order for 8 years, Mr. President, 9 years, or even 10 years, Mr. President. We asked the different agencies of the government, and later on I would show a slide that talks about as to how many job orders and contract of service we have, Mr. President. Perhaps we can show the data right now, because looking at the figures, Mr. President, distinguished colleague, it has been perennially increasing, Mr. President. Unfortunately, despite the fact that almost every year, in every committee hearings, plenary deliberations, we have been raising this particular issue. For example, in 2021, from 449,000 job orders, naging 493,000 noong 2022. Noong 2023, naging 586,551. At ngayon pong taon, lumobo na po ng 676,893. Now, if you look at the contract of service, ganun din po, Mr. President. From 132,000 in 2021 to 148,000 the year after, 2023, 246,000. And ngayon nga po, 262,878. Mr. President, the records will bail me out. When I started this advocacy, Mr. President, it was only 500,000 total number of job orders and contract of service. Now it's 939,771. In this very august chamber, in this Senate, Mr. President, we passed the ending the bill, and we still have Senator Recto, now our Secretary of the Department of Finance. We worked double time in passing this ending the bill. And unfortunately, this representation, who principally authored and sponsored the measure, just found out in ABS-CBN ticker that it was vetoed by the President, Mr. President. And every time we talk about ending endo in the private sector, the private companies would always tell us that the number one violator of endo, or yung ending contract, is the national government. So how can we encourage the private sector to follow suit if you're looking at the numbers and numbers don't lie? Again, from 653,000 in 2020, lumobo na po ito to 939,771. So again, Your Honor, Mr. President, my question is, what is now the status of the request of various agencies for reorganization and reclassification of positions? Because I'm fully aware, Mr. President, even during my time, Mr. President, yung item po for a lawyer in TESDA is not anymore commensurate to a lawyer who would actually apply for that particular position. So we're aware of that, Mr. President, and I'm just here to help out the different agencies of the government and to at least, Mr. President, again, I sound like a broken record, do something about this worsening problem of endo in the government sector. Thank you.
Mr. President, I share the concern of our colleague from Bulacan. In fact, the LGUs have the highest number of job order workers. Now, a lot of it kasi, also political consideration. I mean, this is the truth. You want to give people jobs, so, but then they don't fulfill the plantilla requirement, and also maybe the local government does not have that much in reserves to be able to guarantee all their benefits. So they're given, in short, gumagawa sila na siguro sa sariling tupad program nila. Okay? So they're all listed as job orders. Number two, you are correct, Mr. President, that the requirements also are so difficult to fulfill. For the very high qualification expectation, sometimes the line item or the salary is not commensurate. So the right sizing bill will really help so that it will also prompt us to evaluate all of these plantilla requirements that we are sending out. And also, remember, with the Build Better More project, we are also hiring more seasonal workers and more short-term project workers. And it could have added also to the data. It's not an excuse. Whether or not it's a high or low number, we should really endeavor to make sure that there are more permanent positions if the government can afford to absorb them.
Yeah. Mr. President, I will go later in that particular topic of categories when you talk about employment status of our kababayans, especially in government. Mr. President, may I just find out if there are requests from various agencies to reorganize and reclassify their positions, lodged in perhaps DBM, if I'm not mistaken. Is that it? So,
Meron.
what's now the status, Mr. President, of this request? Because I feel that this would also help in filling up the unfilled positions and at the same time to lower the ballooning number of job orders and contract of service. Do we have a timeline, for instance, or how many?
Or reclassification. Patay na. DPWH, EPI, NBSWD.
Mr. President, it depends on the department. Those that have submitted so far and were approved by the DBM is DSWD. No surprise there. They have a very good secretary. And DTI and DPWH.
I'm glad that DTI, DPWH, and DSWD were mentioned, Mr. President, because I would agree with the statements made by our distinguished chairperson of the Senate Committee on Finance. Ang talagang mas malaking portion ng job order at contract of service ay nandun sa mga local government units. But if you look at the national government status, Mr. President, of its workers, if we can show this slide, the number of job orders and contract of service workers versus number of career or non-career personnel, makikita nyo po dito yung sa DPWH, ngayon po may 41,227 na job order at contract of service. Sa Department of Agriculture, meron pong 5,407. Sa Department of Science and Technology, 1,209. DTI, 2,141. DSWD, 22,412. So, hindi din po siguro tama na sabihin na LGU lang ang violator ng ending-endo, because if you look at these figures, Mr. President, distinguished colleague, malaki po yung numero ng ating mga kababayan na nabigyan ng trabaho, and some of them unfortunately have been in the different agencies and departments of this government na hanggang ngayon job order at contract of service. That's why we wanted to find out, Mr. President, for instance, in the DPWH, tanungin natin, sino ba yung mga JOs and the contract of service? Sasabihin po, yung mga gumagawa ng roads, yung gumagawa ng bridges, naghahalo ng semento, etc. Eh di ho ba, Mr. President, and I wanted to ask this question, policy naman ng gobyerno na mag-hire on a regular basis dahil ang DPWH, expected naman po sila talaga na gumawa ng roads, mag-maintain ng roads and bridges. Hindi po ba, Mr. President?
Mr. President, pag in-add mo naman lahat yan, no, dun sa total na 900,000, yes, maliit nga yung, marami, pero yun nga, makikita mo talaga na yung bulk LGU. Hindi naman natin sinasabi LGU lang ang may problema. Totoo po, na kailangan sa DPWH ang mga nagme-maintain ng karsada, ganyan. Pero alam naman natin na ang nangyayari ay pag may malaking proyekto, doon talaga dagsaan ang mga ilalagay ng mga tao. Now, you cannot hire them permanently,
Yes.
because when you do the maintenance, it's better to hire from the local DPWH office kasi nandun na sila. Ibig na itatransport sila sa iba't ibang lugar. So it's really very limited once you already construct the infrastructure project. That's why it balloons to that much and then later on it contracts. So the total actually for those departments is about 72,398 of the total job orders and contract of service workers for the national government, 72,000 out of
Yeah.
900,000.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also agree that the bulk of JOs and the contract of service nandun po sa LGUs, but we feel na it is important that the national government would do something in helping our job orders and contract of service workers qualified for appointment to regular positions, considering that right now, as mentioned earlier, there are 168,732 items that are still unfilled. So I hope that we're clear on that, and that the national government, especially our friends from the economic team would look into this if we wanted to really take this seriously as a worsening problem, Mr. President. Thank you.
Kamusta? Nahanap.
Let me go to another topic, Mr. President, and this is the
Thank you.
issue on labor force survey and general labor market governance. Mr. President, I commend the administration for getting a very good figure. Itong huling lumabas na unemployment rate po natin na 3.7%. So right now, there are only 1.89 million Filipinos who are unemployed, according to the report, 3.7% from 4.5%. in September of 2023 and August 2024, which is a 4%, no? 3.7% na lang po ang unemployment natin. 49.9 million Filipinos are employed. Ngunit gusto ko lang pong pagtuunan ng pansin kung ito po ay masasabi natin na legitimate and at the same time figures that we are actually acknowledging and sumasang-ayon po tayo, especially yung ating mga economic managers, or perhaps we should look into this in a perhaps more realistic metric of accounting for the number of employed and unemployed persons, or perhaps adding additional metrics, since the international definition does not correspond to the realities on the ground. Would the chairperson of the Senate Committee on Finance agree with this? Because if you look at the PSA labor force survey, which uses the International Labor Organization definition of employed persons, according to the ILO, for operational purposes to identify persons employed in a short reference period, a criterion of 1 hour of work, 1 hour of work for pay or profit is used. So ibig sabihin, this 1 hour criterion ensures that all types of jobs, including part-time, temporary, casual, are taken into account in employment statistics to support the monitoring of the working conditions of all employed persons. So, hindi ko po alam, no? I'm not an expert. I wanted to look for a better metric system or some kind of additional metrics that we can actually use in order to support ito pong ating ginagamit. Because later on, I would show you something na hindi po, what do you call this, hindi po consistent. May ginagamit na ILO standards, meron din po hindi ginagamit na ILO standards, Mr. President.
Ito ba, yung unemployment sa underemployment. Pero yung nire-report yung natin lahat ng work.
Yung average work hours per week for at least 1 hour. Ang definition. If now we didn't use it 1 hour, I think average hours per week is 48, which is 50 hours.
At kita rin ito.
Mr. President, I understand. Although technically, if you're employed by 1 hour, you'd say that you're employed. But there are other metrics also used. For example, underemployment, how much they are actually receiving. Is it commensurate for the work that they do, the number of hours that they have, and also the majority anyway of the employed is that the 40-hour week that we have. There may be some that have or maybe a portion, I don't know exactly the percentage of
Underemployed.
11% are actually underemployed of the given. So it could either be lesser hours, lesser pay, lesser benefits than the standard.
So let me be clarified, Your Honor, Mr. President. The 49.9 million employed in the latest statistics report means that all of these 49.9 million had a 1 hour job. Is that a correct statement?
At least.
At least. So yeah, and I can see and hear the chairperson of the Senate Committee on Finance a bit not comfortable we're not so proud to say that yes, we have 49.9 million employed Filipinos. And now let me go to another.
Mr. President, I don't want also to be misunderstood. It may be that there are a few of them that actually have the minimum number of hours, not the usual 40 hours. But I don't think 1 million is the 1 hour. The average is still 40 hours. So, you'd say that
Average.
it's still the average. So, sabihin na natin, kung ilan man yung employed, at least more than half are actually doing the number of hours that are standard. Now, Baka naman meron dyan 1 hour lang nagtatrabaho pero 40 hours ang bayad.
0.08% lang yung
I'm just kidding.
0.08.
0.08% ang 1 hour
0.08% of the 49.9 million.
of the 49.9 million.
That's a better way of interpreting the employed. I wanted to share this data, Mr. President, distinguished colleague, because according to the ILO guidebook, which we are also following in our methodology in looking at the figures that PSA is actually using. In the guidebook for designing innovative public employment programs, there are different kinds of unemployment, no? And let me put this into the records. One, cyclical, refers to situation where the number of job seekers is more than the available jobs at the prevailing wage rate. Another is structural. Structural unemployment refers to situation where there is a mismatch between jobs offered and the jobs needed, caused by disparity between skills level, geographical location, sectoral shifts in production pattern of a country, and others. Third is frictional. Frictional unemployment, referred to as transitory unemployment. It indicates those unemployed who are transitioning between jobs. Now, there's long-term. Long-term unemployment, ito naman yung nire-refer to those who are unemployed for a longer period. Typically, unemployed siya for longer period, typically for more than 6 months. And then you have specific. Refers to easily identifiable groups. Ito ba ay parte ng kababaihan, kabataan, or racial group in society that suffered disproportionately from unemployment. May we know if this is also being used by our friends from PCA when coming up with this report, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President, according to the NEDA Secretary, there is really a report based on gender, age group, demographic, etc.
If
By
that-
industry and by region as well.
So if they are using this, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, so if we're talking about 1.89 million unemployed Filipinos, may we know the breakdown of the 1.89 million? Ilan po dito yung frictional, structural, cyclical, long-term, at specific, or perhaps siguro kahit isa dalawa lang po dito sa data na ito para lang po makita po natin. Kasi tinanong ko po yung katanungan na yan sapagkat naobserbahan din po natin, Ginoong Pangulo, tuwing pumasok ang bare months, halos nawawala, bumababa itong unemployment natin. Taon-taon po yan, pag pumasok na yung bare months, no? Specifically dito sa NCR. Pagdating naman po ng mga summertime doon sa mga beaches, yan, tumataas din po. No? So, seasonal po sila. And I'm asking this question so as legislators, we can find ways and means to help out ang ating pamahalaan para ma-project natin at ngayon po budget season, madala natin yung tamang pondo dun sa mga sektor na nangangailangan po nito.
Yes, Mr. President, there is a data for that. I believe it will answer most of the questions of the gentleman from Bulacan, and the NEDA will be submitting that to our good colleague if he will agree that instead of reading it right now.
Okay. I will wait for that, Mr. President. I don't have problems with that. Mr. President, siguro yung tanong ko na lang din, Mr. President, as main sponsor and author of Trabaho para sa Bayan Plan, I can see my good friend here from NEDA, Secretary Balisacan. Yung pong following the conduct of consultations for the crafting of the Trabaho para sa Bayan Plan, may we know, Mr. President, kung part of that report would include itong mga binabanggit at napag-uusapan natin. Example, Mr. President, yung trends being observed by our economic managers in the past labor force surveys in terms of jobs, considering the increased from the regular 9 to 5 jobs to more alternative working arrangements. At kaya po dito sa Senado, sa Senate Committee on Labor, we have been talking of coming up, if not add more different working arrangements, Mr. President. And that led to the passage of, if you recall, Mr. President, the passage of Telecommuting Act or the Work from Home Act, Mr. President.
The trabaho para sa bayan plan will be completed by the end of this month, end of this year.
The trabaho para sa bayan
Bayan.
plan will
Which you
be
co-authored, Mr. President.
Yes, yes, Mr. President, proudly will be available at the end of this year.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. And one last thing about the NED report, I was able to browse the statements issued by NEDA that the government would continue implementing supply and demand side interventions to achieve quality employment targets under the Philippine Development Plan. May we know, Mr. President, before I leave this topic, what kind of interventions will be implemented to improve the job quality and the incomes of Filipino workers? As mentioned a while ago, nandyan yung seasonal, nandyan yung mga problema natin pagkatapos na ng Pasko, bumabalik na at tumataas muli yung unemployment, yung mga trabaho na hindi supisyente para buhayin ang isang pamilya at kung paano natin masisiguro na makalikha pa tayo ng mga dekalidad na trabaho, Mr. President.
Actually, Mr. President, that's also in line with what our Secretary of Finance have mentioned earlier. A lot of investments for our economy to grow. That's why by creating more jobs, actually, kung napapansin niyo, actually quality engineers or even construction workers are difficult to come by with all of the building progress that is happening. So more demand for workers will actually make it more lucrative for them because to be able to win those workers to work for you, you'd actually have to compensate them better. Kaya nga pinapalitan rin natin yung mga government requirements sa plantilla kasi nga hindi na tayo makakuha unless we become more competitive. So that's one. Number two is also human development. So katulad nga ng ginawa ng ating masipag na senator from Bulacan, itong mga skills training and initiatives ay hindi lamang isinasa batas kung hindi binibigyan pa ng pondo para nga yung ating mga kababayan mas maging magaling sila sa kanilang bokasyon at mas makakuha sila ng sweldong nararapat para dun sa kanilang nalalaman. So dalawang factors yan, investments, jobs creation, and also human development.
Salamat po, Ginoong Pangulo. Salamat din sa ating chairperson ng Senate Committee on Finance na nag-approve ng mga karagdagang pondo na ating inilagay doon po sa Skills Development Authority ng ating bansa. And I cannot agree more, Mr. President, na napakahalaga na tignan natin na hindi lang yung investments, kung hindi yung financial investments, kundi yung human resources investments para masiguro natin na ready din po tayo, lalo na ngayon po ay nandyan na yung artificial intelligence. Just recently, I was in Singapore. I saw yung robot na si Ella, na kapwa ko barista. She can do 200 cups of coffee in an hour. And just recently, I was also told that Robot Ella is already in SM Mega Mall. So kung hindi tayo naghahanda dito sa mga ganitong initiatives na nangyayari sa ating kapaligiran, mahirap po makipagsabayan. In South Korea, they're already taxing their robots. In Saudi Arabia, what's her name? There's the first Saudi Arabian citizen robot si Sophia, Robot Sophia. Ganun din sa mga Amazon warehouses, yung Kiva robots nila, yun na yung ginagamit nila. And that's why I feel, Mr. President, that it's important na we invest in our human resources dahil yan ang tunay na yaman ng mga Pilipino. Even abroad, talagang hinahanap yung mga Filipino workers. Let me go to my last topic, Mr. President. We'd like to find out about the infrastructure programs of the administration. I've been listening attentively to the statements being answered by our distinguished colleague, the chairperson of the Senate Committee on Finance, na ang sentro ng ating pamahalaan ay to build more, yung paggamit at paggasta natin nakalaan sa mga infrastructure projects natin. And tayo po dito sa Senado, nag-hearing po tayo ilang beses, lalong-lalo na nung nagkaroon ng matinding pagbaha. Hindi lamang sa Bulacan, kundi sa ibang parte ng ating bansa. Mr. President, I have been saying this for quite some time na ang budget ng ating pamahalaan for flood control alone, kasama ang DPWH, MMDA, Climate Change Commission, DENR, etc., ay tumataginting na 1,444,000,000 a day. So, gusto nating may check at malaman kung saan ba ito napupunta. Noong pong nagkaroon ng pagdinig, ang committee ni Senator Bong Revilla, napag-alaman po natin mismo sa ating secretary ng Department of Public Works and Highways, and I will go to this later on. Merong 74 infrastructure flagship projects according to DPWH. Ito rin po yung nasa NEDA. 13 of them were tagged as water resources projects and have indications that they are used for flood control and mitigation. Pero tinitingnan ko po itong mga big ticket items, no, Mr. President, especially itong mga foreign assisted projects. Again, during our hearing dito sa Senado, it was highlighted that we need foreign assisted projects because they are the big ticket items that contribute to long-term flood mitigation. Yun po yung lumabas doon sa pagdinig. An example would be the Metro Manila Flood Control Project funded by the World Bank. Pero kung titingnan po natin itong mga foreign assisted projects, budget ng DPWH, ang lumabas po doon sa pagdinig, napakaliit o mas maliit ito kumpara sa small ticket projects. Kaya ang lumabas nga po doon sa pagdinig, patsi-patsi yung mga proyekto. Patsi-patsi yung naging project. And Senator Amy Marcos would also attest to this because she was there during that hearing. Why don't we invest, Mr. President, more in big ticket flood control projects? Kasi yun po yung lumabas nitong pagdinig, no? Lumabas po na for the past 3 years, we spent over 500 billion pesos for the flood control program, but we only allocated 25 billion for the foreign assisted programs. Now, in 2024, FAPs are in the unprogrammed, Mr. President, itong 2024. So, in the last 3 years, I'm looking at the data, we have only allocated 3.8 billion for the foreign assisted projects, which represents only 0.7% of the total flood management program of the DPWH. Kaya, masakit to isipin, Mr. President, especially coming from a province like Bulacan, na taon-taon ho, binabanggit ho natin, ito yung flood control project, ito yung napupunta sa aming rehiyon, yun nga pong nakaraan doon sa Bicol region, mismo ang ating Senate President wanted to look into this because the past 2 years ay 60 billion plus yung naka-lodge doon sa flood control projects. Pero pag tinignan po natin at gaya nung nakaraang pagdinig sa DPWH, sinasabi po nila yung mga small items ang napagbigyan, hindi yung big items. Again, Mr. President, it only represents 0.7% of the total flood management program ng DPWH, yung foreign assisted FMPs, Mr. President, ng DPWH, Mr. President, doon sa foreign assisted project. So, may we know, Mr. President, why we are not investing more in big ticket flood control projects na makikita natin talaga yung pong prutas ng ating labor at investment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Actually, I agree. There should really be a national plan as to the all these waterways and general engineering projects. We just approved yesterday 2 major projects for the flooding control, and that's in Marikina.
57 billion.
57 billion itong sa Marikina, and Cavite 30 billion.
I'm sorry, Mr. President, in Cavite and Marikina, with yung Las Piñas daw, wala?
JICA funded.
Yung Cavite, Mr. President, how much? And sa Marikina, sorry.
Marikina 60 billion,
30.
30 billion, and then in Cavite magkano? Cavite 20 billion. 20.
Additionally, there's an existing
Okay.
project, but we are adding 27 billion to address the issue of resilient.
Okay, so there are existing projects in Cavite, but we're adding 27 billion more for flood mitigation. Hindi kaya magkagulo yung mga ibang
It's to improve the design. So
to improve the design. Okay, so this is the JICA project. This is for Cavite. Now in Marikina, additional din yan.
57.
25 billion additional.
Mr. President,
25 billion additional sa Marikina.
I'm willing to wait for the total number of projects that have been approved recently, plus the figures. I'm more than willing to wait for it, Mr. President. My only point, Mr. President, is that if you look at this figure, Mr. President, 0.7% lang ng ginagastos natin na 1.44 billion pesos a day ang napupunta doon sa foreign assisted project na kinukonsider natin na big item projects, Mr. President. Mr. President, let me go to another issue on multipurpose water infrastructure. As I mentioned a while ago, the DPWH has 74 infrastructure flagship projects according to the NEDA. Yun po yung ni-report sa atin.
Actually, Mr. President, just a correction, it's 186 flagship projects.
186. No, but these are water infrastructure.
Water
Yung sa
structures,
74,
okay,
opo.
74.
And 13 of this 13 lang yung sa water resources projects, if I'm not mistaken, and have indications that they are used for flood control and mitigation. If I'm correct, Mr. President, please correct me if I'm wrong. That's correct, right? 13 of these are tagged as water resources. Karamihan po sa mga ito, Mr. President, may connection sa flood mitigation o flood control. May we know, Mr. President, alin sa mga proyektong ito ang may iba pang gamit kagaya po ng irigasyon, kuryente, industrial at iba pa, Mr. President, mula po dito sa 13 water resources projects.
Power.
Yeah.
Irrigation, power, industrial.
Actually, the one in Iloilo, always
Halur.
yeah, the great province of Iloilo. Multi-purpose po yan, yung dam nila.
Nautusan po ako ng principal. Hingi daw lang po ako ng report at bigyan ko ng kopya ang bawat isa. So, if that
Okay.
is possible.
Of course, of course. So yun nga, yung example nga doon, yung dam doon, for irrigation, for power, di ba? So, at saka water supply for households.
Sige po, para mas mapadali, hintayin na lang po namin, Mr. President. Ayan po yung ang gusto ko sana nating malaman, Mr. President, from this list na 13, ilan po dito yung mayroong component ng may iba pang gamit gaya po ng irigasyon, kuryente, industrial at iba pa mula po dito sa 13 na ito. And I will give a copy to our principal, Senator Villar.
Thank you.
Guro, yun na lang po yung ihintayin ko po, no, yung ilan dito sa mga proyekto yung may iba pa pong gamit. One last thing, Mr. President, gusto kong itanong, Mr. President, kasi pinag-usapan po natin yung flood foreign assisted projects. Isa ko yung mga saro nitong mga nakaraang araw. Parang 800 pages po yun, Mr. President. At napag-alaman ko po, for example, ito po sa flood mitigation related FAPs na pinondohan under the unprogrammed funds. Gusto natin malaman ano yung details nitong mga foreign assisted projects that have been allotted additional funds under the latest Special Allotment Release Order or SARO for DPWH. Kasi if I may show you a slide, Mr. President, ito po yung narilisan ng unprogrammed funds, no, dito sa ating mga flood foreign assisted projects. So makita po natin diyan, for example, nung June 6, yung SARO BMBA 24004246. Yan po, June 6 of 2024. Nakalagay po dyan, to cover the first and second quarter GOP counterpart requirements of the Panay Guimaras Negros Island Bridges project. Yung SARO BMBA 2400148004 as of September 17, 2024, 201 million. Kinover po niya yung loan proceeds requirement for the implementation of the Metro Manila Bridges Project, ADB loan po ito. At yung September 17, 2024, sa nagkakalagang 153.436 million, SARO number BMBA 2400148002 ay kino-cover naman po nito yung third and fourth quarter na GOP counterpart requirements ng Panay Island Bridges Project. Ito pong dalawa na nasa itaas at nasa ibaba, 10 billion po at 11 billion. Pero dito po, wala akong nakalagay. Ang nakalagay lang po to cover the first and second quarter counterpart requirements of various foreign assisted projects. Saan po ito, Mr. President? At ano yung description to? Bakit wala po dito, Mr. President?
That's a very good question. Even I'm curious. Let me wait for the explanation of the DBM.
Sorry.
Kasi lumabas na dyan.
Nakuha niyo yung SARO number, di sinit niyo.
Can we just submit that also to the here?
Yeah, Mr. President, I don't mind na may submit, Mr. President. But may we just be enlightened whether or not these funds that were released under unprogrammed funds ay parte ng foreign assisted project na tumutukoy sa problema natin sa pagbaha o ito'y parte ng flood control project, Mr. President.
Mr. President, what I have initially here, for example, is the Davao Bypass Construction Package, JICA PH 273. Meron din ditong Philippines-Korea Project Preparation, Output of Roads and Bridges, Dalton Pass Alignment, JICA. So, ito lahat yung...
But it's not flood control, Mr. President. I just wanted to focus on
may
the flood
floodway
control
bridges construction.
because, Mr. President, the premise of this question lies on the fact that the flood control programs, the big ticket items, were placed under unprogrammed. Yun yung basis nitong question na ito, Mr. President. That's why we are wanting na to see itong breakdown. But it's okay, Mr. President. I will wait for it as a lot of our colleagues are also interested in looking for this list. And I will no longer belabor the question, Mr. President. I will just wait for the submission, Mr. President, to find out yung tinatanong natin, yung details ng tinatanong po natin. And
Meron mga integrated disaster risk reduction adaptations na kasama may mga water projects. But
ma'am,
yan-
is it part of the 10 billion or the 11 billion?
Actually, it's part of a bigger pie. So I think that DBM.
So it's more than the
Yeah.
the figures that we are showing.
I don't think we are directly asking answering your question, to be honest. And I think this is something that DBM has to clarify because the total 11 billion and 10 billion, parang hindi ko nakikita dito exactly. So I don't know if they're lumped
I guess
together.
that's the reason, Mr. President.
Oo.
That's the reason why I flash on screen the number of SARO, Mr. President.
Meron ditong 11,709. Yan ba yon? Hindi iba rin eh. So,
Anyway, Mr. President, we'll wait for the list, Mr. President. We're willing to wait. And again, the premise of this representation's question is based on the fact that big ticket items that were supposed to address the problem of flooding in the country were placed under unprogrammed, Mr. President. So I hope that we can do something about it kasi mahirap umuwi ng Bulacan tuwing umuulan at bumabaha. At tingin ko yung mga kababayan natin ayaw na po ng relief goods, Mr. President. Ang gusto nila talaga solusyon.
Open yung exact
Kaya
na yan.
salamat po, Mr. President. That would be my last question. And I'd like to thank our distinguished colleague, the chairperson of the Senate Committee on Finance, for patiently answering these representations questions. Maraming salamat, Ginoong Pangulo. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Villanueva. Thank you, Senator Grace. Majority Leader.
Mr. President,